Hello, everyone. We are back. My name is Carly Riley. I have been covering the Sam Bankman-Fried trial, going to court every day to bring you all of the crazy news about this case. But court is off for Monday through Wednesday of this week, so I wanted to talk about something a little bit different today. It is connected to FTX and Alameda, and it is perhaps not just as crazy as FTX and Alameda, but it is a crazy story about a missing $1.1 billion and how $2 billion companies sought to hide that $1 billion hole in the balance sheet, if that sounds familiar at all. And no, it's not FTX and Alameda. It's two different companies that did this, that were interconnected with one another. Oh my God, this space. In any case, some of this story is known, but there is an update to it. So I wanted to provide you with that update. But before we dive in, I do have to shout out OpenSea, Ledger, Web3 Cents, our sponsors. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. And of course, if you are liking this, please do like, subscribe, comment, all the things. I love reading your comments. I really appreciate it. And please do let me know if there's something else you want me to cover in the future. All right, let's dive into this. So last week, New York Attorney General Letitia James filed a lawsuit, a complaint, against 3 companies and 2 of their CEOs or former CEOs. So the complaint was filed against Gemini. Folks might be familiar with Gemini. Against Genesis. That might sound familiar because they've come up in our Alameda conversation. And against DCG, the digital currency group, whose acronym I always manage to screw up somehow. So if I do that in this video, please don't blame me. And the complaint was also filed against Michael Morrow, who was the CEO of Genesis, and Barry Silbert, who is the CEO and I believe the co-founder of DCG. Now, there's a lot to this case, and I'm going to give you the quick version. We're going to break this down into a couple of parts. So first, you have Gemini. Gemini is a crypto exchange. Unlike FTX, it was not secretly and illegally lending its customers' deposits to other funds to go and lose. But like FTX, it did lend its customers' deposits to other folks to go and lose. The difference is they were telling customers they were going to do this. In February of 2021, Gemini launched Gemini Earn, and that's really specifically what we're talking about here. It is separate from the Gemini exchange. Typically, Gemini Earn was a program not unlike any of these other crypto lending programs like BlockFi or Celsius in terms of its basic premise, which is that you would deposit your digital assets on Gemini Earn to be lent out and hopefully generate high returns and yields, which would then flow back to you and you would get this high yield for keeping your money there. Now, this always, of course, comes with some kind of inherent risk, but the problem with Gemini is that they advertised that their program was relatively safe. Specifically, they lent a lot of this money to Genesis, and they said that they regularly reviewed Genesis's balance sheets and financial statements, and that they were an investment worthy, an investment grade company, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where we start to get some trouble. Because while everything was fine throughout 2021, again, this program launched in February of 2021, everything's fine in 2021 while numbers go up and things are looking good and crypto prices are soaring. But things get less good in 2022, as we all know. And to the credit of Gemini's risk analysis team, in early 2022, they start to see the writing on the wall and say, shoot, things aren't looking as good. Genesis isn't looking as good as it once was. Let's give you some examples. In February 2022, the risk analysis team at Gemini downgrades Genesis's credit rating from a triple B to triple C, which means it goes from investment grade to not investment grade with that downgrade. And yet, the program, Gemini Earn, continues to run, continues to take customer deposits, and continues to give those customer deposits to Genesis without, as far as we know, any update to their language on their page or on social media. Again, this is still alleged. This is all in this complaint. There hasn't been a trial. Then in July, this one blows my mind. In July of 2022, a Gemini board member, having looked and gotten a glimpse into the Genesis financials, compares it to Lehman Brothers before Lehman collapses. So like the Terra Luna of the 2008 financial crisis, in that it was like the initial powder keg that lit the match that caused everything else to collapse. That is the comparison. It was compared to that. And yet still, Gemini Earn continued to run, continued to take customer money, and continued to lend that money out to Genesis while they continued to say on their website, like, hey, we do all this like risk analysis. Give your money to us because we do risk analysis and presumably take action as a result of that risk analysis, even though they were not taking action as a result of their risk analysis. Finally, in September of 2022, Gemini looks around and they're like, okay, we got to do something about this Gemini Earn program because we're going on like 7 months of talking about that this shit is risky and we have not done anything. So they decide to close the Gemini Earn program in September of 2022. But they fail to say this publicly or publicly enough. And they continue for the next 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, until this all collapses in November of 2022, continue to take tens of millions of dollars from customers and give it to Genesis. Even while some employees at Gemini shut down their Gemini Earn accounts because they've seen the writing on the wall, they've heard that this is a program that's closing down, and so they get to basically front run the disaster. And now you have 233,000 Gemini Earn customers who are out over $1 billion. But where did that $1 billion go? I want to turn now to Genesis and a missing $1.1 billion and what they chose to do once they lost $1.1 billion. But before we do, we need to hear a word from our amazing sponsor, Web3Sense, who makes this show possible. Thank you, Web3Sense. Let's hear it from them. Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. Okay, let's talk about Genesis. Genesis was a digital asset financial services firm. They did a variety of different things. They made trades, and they also loaned money to others, including folks like Three Arrows Capital and Alameda. There were a lot of problems at Genesis, including their loan book was apparently quite under-collateralized, despite advertising it as over-collateralized, which either way, we kind of know now what all this means because we know Alameda was regularly posting FTT as collateral. So even if they were over-collateralized, FTT was like a highly risky asset that was not exactly the kind of foolhardy collateral that I would want to know was backing the way my money was being loaned out. But anyway, that's not really what I want to talk about because believe it or not, the crazier part of this story has essentially nothing to do with collateral at all. We all know what happens in May and June of 2022. You have Terra Luna collapse, causing contagion throughout the industry, and Three Arrows Capital, who, as we know, Genesis was lending quite a bit of money to, goes bankrupt as a result of this. So the fall of Three Arrows Capital leaves a $1.1 billion hole in the Genesis balance sheet that they are not super keen on having to talk about publicly. Now, I can understand this impulse. You're Genesis. You're going, oh my God, we've got this $1.1 billion hole that was just created. If we are super public about this and announce it, then more people are going to ask for their money back and more customers are going to try and get their money back from Gemini Earn, and that could bring the whole thing down, and then we could actually go bankrupt, and then we actually might not be able to pay back all of the various people that we need to be able to pay back. Maybe the better option is to try and fix this so that we become whole again so that no more people lose their money. Now that is like a lovely idea. The problem becomes if you mislead people about the missing $1.1 billion too much, you may in fact cause more people to put money with you that you're going to ultimately lose, and you screw over more people in the process of trying to cover up the fact that you're screwed to begin with. And that, of course, has been the story of FTX that we've covered, and it will ultimately become the story of Genesis. So Genesis is like, we don't want to talk about this $1.1 billion that's now missing from our balance sheet. What can we do? How can we get $1.1 billion really fast? And what they settled on is that their parent company, their mom and dad over at Digital Currency Group, DCG, are going to write them an IOU for $1.1 billion that they can just list as an asset on their books to, and look, I'm using somewhat heated language here, but to trick people like Gemini Earn into continuing to lend them money because they think that they're more stable than they actually are. And that is what these people do. So DCG writes a $1.1 billion promissory note. The details of this promissory note are that it's to be paid back in 10 years. So in 2032 is when it'll be paid back. And they have an interest rate of like 1% annually on it. Now, between the time this promissory note is written in June of 2022 and November of 2022, this complaint at least alleges that there was no interest ever paid and there was no like principal ever paid toward this. Like nothing was ever paid about this promissory note that was definitely for sure for real, and not just like a way to cover a hole in a balance sheet in the hopes that ultimately this whole situation would resolve itself just because Genesis made enough money. Like in my mind, I don't know, feels like unlikely that DCG was ever really planning on paying this back. Seems like something they were just like, this will go away over time if people are just like confident enough in the system. In any case, they write this $1.1 billion promissory note. And then of course, they're not forthcoming about this. No. They say that DCG, quote, absorbed the loss that they took from Three Arrows Capital. No, they didn't. They wrote you a promissory note that they're maybe going to pay back in 10 years. But they say, DCG, don't worry, DCG absorbed the loss we took from Three Arrows Capital and then apparently listed it as an asset that could be reduced to cash within a year. Within a year? What are you talking about? They're not paying you back for 10 years. Listed it as an asset that could be reduced to cash within a year and then didn't include any footnotes in the documentation they sent to Gemini Earn giving any level of additional explanation about this that might actually reveal the truth about this promissory note. And this is the document. They did all this in the document they sent off to Gemini Earn to say, hey, don't worry about it. Keep giving us money. Now, what's crazy is this was happening in June, July of 2022, is that in July of 2022, that's when we had the Gemini board member say, hey, their finances resemble Lehman Brothers before it collapsed. And he said this without even having the full picture of just how effed their balance sheet was, because they did not give details about this promissory note that was due in 10 years by their parent company who wrote it to fill this hole in their balance sheet.
That's crazy.
Now, it's unclear to me exactly how secretive this promissory note was at the time. In November of 2022, Barry Silbert, the DCG CEO, did write a shareholder letter in which he referenced this promissory note and described the promissory note. But he did this in November of 2022 after everything had already imploded. And it's not entirely obvious to me what they really disclosed publicly about this when it mattered, which was in June of 2022 when they did this whole thing. I mean, look, they're being sued. So clearly people feel, including the District of New York feels, that they were not forthcoming enough about all of this. They called it like normal intercompany loan stuff. And it's like, okay, but this normal intercompany loan stuff seems to have been done with the intent to mislead people into giving you money that they may not have otherwise given you because of the state of your finances. Any case, I mean, look, this whole thing just comes down to a mismatched duration problem, which we have now talked about over and over again. And it seems like it's the undoing of every company, which is you had a short-term liquid liability. You had money you owed to Gemini Earn customers who could ask for that money back at any time. And then you had a long-term asset in the form of this billion-dollar loan you were going to get paid back in 10 years. And then, of course, this whole house of cards collapses in November of 2022 because what happens? Alameda goes bankrupt. And Genesis had also been loaning money to Alameda. And Alameda becomes the final straw. When Alameda can't pay Genesis back, they're officially done for. They've already lost the $1.1 billion from Three Arrows Capital. Now they've lost however much they lost because of Alameda. And the whole thing implodes with Genesis declaring bankruptcy after Alameda does. So that's today's story time, folks. With court on pause, I thought it would be an interesting time to take a look at some of the after effects, the ripple effects of everything we've been talking about with FTX and Alameda. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Perhaps this lawsuit will be the next case that I cover, if it's interesting enough. I don't know exactly the details of when they'll be going to court, or if it's open, or if it's a jury trial, or if they'll end up having some sort of settlement agreement before anything gets to that. Unclear, but I will keep following along, and I appreciate you being here. Like I said, please do like, subscribe, comment, all the things. Tell me what you want to hear more of. And I'll be back in court on Thursday with all of the updates.
Love.